Another fascinating study was done in 2020 on gender identity. This time, it was done in the case of cis people or non-trans people. Now, if you're familiar with those really cool body illusion experiments, where they'll take somebody's arm, put it under the table, replace it with a rubber arm, and they'll stimulate both at the same time. They'll stroke both arms at the same time. And so your brain looking at this is like, wow, this is part of my body now. And so what they'll do is they'll strike the rubber arm, and you'll actually feel pain or sensations of that rubber hand. And this is something that really happens in all people, not just trans people. This study did something very similar, but they took people that were cisgender or non-trans, and they virtually imposed these bodies of people from the opposite sex onto their own, right, through these VR headsets. And so they were in these headsets, and they were asked questions. They were stimulated, like in the case of the rubber hand, and they discovered that after the study, the experiments, they did 3 separate experiments, and they found that their gender identities were actually shifted a bit by them taking on the body of another person of the opposite sex. Cis women would view themselves more masculine or more of a male, not necessarily male, but more androgynously, right, than when they first began the experiment. This demonstrates something remarkable, that our gender identities are influenced by how we perceive our bodies, and it's a bit more flexible than we thought it was. And when you combine this with the other studies showing that, for example, this one where it looked at trans people and cis people, showed them pictures of themselves with different types of bodies, some more masculine, more feminine, more androgynous. And they also found that their brain responses matched their gender identities. Trans people looked at themselves as the body they wanted, and their brains activated in the same way that the cis people's brain did in their respective gender identity. The prefrontal cortex, the limbic areas like the amygdala, these areas are heavily correlated to gender identities, which is further supported by a plethora of other studies on the neurobiology of gender identity. So when we combine all this evidence, right, behavioral experiments, neuroimaging experiments where they take MRI scans of the brain, when we combine all this evidence, we find that there is a stark neurobiological basis behind gender identities. Also, you can watch my previous video where I mentioned trans phantom sensations, which further supports what we're saying here, right? And so there is a consensus building amongst endocrinologists, neuroscientists, that neurobiology has a lot to do with how we identify in respect to our genders. And so, yeah, hope you learned something.